I always thought hatred was loud, like yelling, slamming doors, fists through walls. But my stepfather's hatred was quiet, controlled, surgical, and for years, it lived in the space between us. The first thing he ever said to me was, "You're taller than I expected." Not hello, not nice to meet you. Just that said with a flat voice, eyes already measuring me like I was a problem he hadn't decided how to solve yet. I was 21 when my mom married him, old enough to know when someone didn't want me around, old enough to feel like I was suddenly a guest in my own childhood home. His name was Mark, mid-40s, former military, broad shoulders, quiet presence, the kind of man who filled a room without saying much. He didn't drink much, didn't laugh much, didn't talk about himself at all. He had rules. Not written ones, but you learn them fast. Don't leave dishes in the sink. Don't stay out late without texting. Don't bring friends over unannounced, especially not male friends. He never said it outright, but I felt it every time his eyes lingered a little too long on whoever I walked in with. Every time his jaw tightened. Every time he found a reason to suddenly need something from the kitchen when I was laughing too loudly in the living room. I came out when I was 19. My mom cried, hugged me, told me she loved me. Mark wasn't in the room. Later that night, he knocked on my door once sharp, firm, and said, "Just so we're clear, I don't want that lifestyle shoved in my face." That was it. After that, we existed like two people sharing a truce neither of us had signed. Polite, cold, avoidant. He'd ask my mom about my classes instead of asking me. I'd wait until I heard his truck pull into the driveway before leaving my room. It was easier that way, until the night everything broke. It happened in winter, the kind of cold that makes the house creak and groan like it's alive. My mom had taken a late shift to the hospital double shift, actually, which meant it was just me and him under the same roof. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the power going out. No warning, no flique, just darkness swallowing the house whole. I remember standing in my room, phone flashlight on, listening to the wind slam against the siding. I could hear Mark moving downstairs, steady footsteps, calm, like this was nothing new to him. I didn't go down right away. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Maybe something else I wasn't ready to name yet. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard him say my name. Not loud. Not angry. Just different. "Hey, can you come down here for a second?" I hesitated. When I finally stepped into the living room, the only light came from the fireplace he'd already started. Flames flickered across his face, carving sharp shadows into his jaw. He looked older like that. Tired. "The breaker's fried," he said. "I'll deal with it tomorrow. For now, we're stuck like this." I nodded. Awkward silence settled between us. Then he added, "You're shaking." See, it wasn't a suggestion. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, arms folded tight, hoodie pulled up. The fire cracked. The wind howled. Everything felt louder without electricity. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Your mom worries about you." I laughed softly. "She always does." He nodded, stared at the fire. "She thinks I don't like you." My heart kicked hard. "Well," I said carefully, "do you?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally looked at me, his expression wasn't angry. It was conflicted, and that scared me more than hatred ever had. "Things aren't always what they look like," he said. That was the moment I knew. Whatever was coming next, there was no going back. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like he was bracing himself for impact. "I didn't plan on becoming someone's replacement," he said quietly. "Especially not an adult son who already had his own way of being." That surprised me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. "You're not replacing anyone," I said. "I'm not a kid." "I know," he replied quickly. Then slower, "That's part of the problem." I frowned. "What does that even mean?" He exhaled through his nose, a long breath that looked practiced. "It means I don't know where I fit with you. With who you are." There it was. The thing that always hovered but never landed. "My being gay?" I asked. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away either. "Yes." I waited for the lecture. The discomfort. The disappointment wrapped in discipline. Instead, he said something I never expected. "It scares me." I laughed, sharp and defensive. "I don't see how that's my problem." "It's not." he said immediately. That's the point. Silence stretched again, thicker this time. The firelight made his face softer somehow. Less rigid. Less like the man who corrected how I parked the car or reminded me to lock the door every night like the world was waiting to break in. I grew up in a house where anything different got shut down fast, he continued. You learned to bury things, feelings, questions, anything that didn't fit the mold. I shifted on the couch, suddenly hyper-aware of how close we were. Still a full cushion between us, but closer than we'd ever been by choice. So when I look at you, he said, so comfortable with who you are, it hits things I thought were dead. That made my chest tighten. You hate me because I remind you of something? I asked. He shook his head. No. I pulled away because I didn't trust myself not to screw it up. That landed harder than anger ever could. I stared at the fire, trying to make sense of it. You could have just talked to me. He let out a short, humorless laugh. I'm not good at that. I noticed, then a small smirk, the first I'd ever seen directed at me. The wind rattled the windows again, stronger this time. The temperature dropped fast. I rubbed my arms, hoodie doing little to help. You cold? He asked. Yeah, a bit. He stood without another word, walked to the hall closet, and came back with a thick blanket. He hesitated just for a second before handing it to me. Our fingers brushed. It was nothing, completely accidental, but my body reacted anyway. I pulled the blanket around myself, suddenly too warm, too aware of him sitting back down. This time, he didn't take the far end of the couch. He sat one seat closer. Look, he said, voice low, I don't expect you to forgive me, or like me. I just don't want you thinking I hate you. I swallowed. Then what do you feel? He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher. I feel like I failed at something I never knew how to do. I turned to look at him then. For the first time, he looked human, not the authority figure, not my mom's husband, just a man carrying weight he didn't know where to put. I didn't need a second dad, I said quietly. I just needed respect. He nodded. I could do that. Another pause. Then, softer, if you let me try again. The power was still out. The world outside still howling. And somehow, in that flickering firelight, the space between us felt different. Charged. Unfamiliar. Not comfortable. But no longer hostile either. I didn't know it yet, but that night was only beginning. And the thing that would finally shatter his hatred forever hadn't even happened yet. We sat there longer than either of us meant to. The fire burned lower, the house settling into those quiet nighttime sounds you only notice when everything else goes still. The blanket was heavy on my shoulders. Mark leaned back, hands resting on his thighs, staring straight ahead like he was afraid if he looked at me too long, something would crack. I should check the windows, he said finally, standing up. Storm's getting worse. I nodded, relieved for the break in tension. He moved through the house methodically, flashlight in hand, checking locks, testing frames. I watched from the couch, noticing things I never had before, how deliberate he was, how everything he did had a purpose. It wasn't control for control's sake. It was vigilance, protection. When he came back, snow had started tapping against the glass. Looks like it's sticking, he said. If the roads freeze, your mom might not be home until morning. Something about that made my stomach flip. Guess we're stuck, I said. Guess so. He hesitated, then gestured toward the fireplace. You should move closer. It'll be colder once that dies down. I shifted closer, careful, deliberate. Still not touching. Still respectful. But close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him, now not just from the fire. We watched the flames in silence. After a while, he spoke again. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to shut up if it's too much. I shrugged. Fair warning given. He nodded once. When you look at me, what do you see? I blinked. What do you mean? He swallowed. Do you see the guy who married your mom? Or do you just see someone who's been in your way? I thought about it. About the slammed doors, the rules, the coldness, but also the times he'd fix my car without asking. The way he always waited up if I was out late, pretending he just happened to be watching TV. The way he never once spoke badly about me to my mom, even when we argued. I see someone who didn't know what to do with me, I said slowly, and chose distance instead of messing up. His jaw tightened. That's probably accurate. Another pause. Then he surprised me again. I was wrong about you. I turned toward him. In what way? I thought you were reckless. Loud. Like you didn't care what your choices did to the people around you. He shook his head. But you're thoughtful. You pay attention. You hold yourself together even when you don't have to. My chest warmed in a way the fire couldn't explain. You've never said anything like that to me before, I said. I know. His voice dropped. I should have. The fire crackled, throwing light across his hands. I noticed they were slightly clenched. Mark, I said, surprising myself by using his name instead of him in my head. I don't need you to understand everything about me. He looked at me then. Really looked. I just need you to stop seeing me as a problem. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not fear. Relief. I can do that, he said quietly. I already am. The wind howled outside, rattling the house again. Instinctively, without thinking, he reached out, then stopped himself halfway, hand hovering near my shoulder. Sorry, he said immediately. Didn't mean to dash. It's okay, I said. And this time I meant it. His hand settled lightly on my shoulder. Not gripping, not possessive, just grounding, like he was anchoring himself as much as me. For the first time since he'd entered my life, I didn't feel like I had to brace myself around him. I felt safe. And that realization, that unexpected, dangerous sense of closeness was what finally shattered whatever hatred had once existed between us. Neither of us said it out loud, but we both felt it. And neither of us knew yet how much that single night would change the way we looked at each other forever. I don't know how long his hand stayed on my shoulder. Minutes, maybe. Long enough for the storm outside to fade into background noise. Long enough for my breathing to slow, to match the steady rhythm of his. Long enough for something fragile and new to settle between us. Eventually, he pulled his hand back carefully, like he didn't want to spook either of us. I should get some more wood, he said, clearing his throat. Yeah, I replied. Fire's dying. We moved around each other in the kitchen, both suddenly very aware of shared space. Knees almost brushing, hands narrowly missing. It wasn't awkward in the way it used to be sharp, defensive. It was tentative, like learning a new language with someone you'd spent years misunderstanding. When we came back to the living room, the fire was stronger again, the light warmer. You can take the couch, he said. I'll grab the spare mattress from a basement. You don't have to, I said quickly. I'm fine up here. He hesitated. You sure? I nodded. Really? That seemed to matter to him. He didn't argue. Instead, he grabbed another blanket and draped it over the back of the couch close enough that our shoulders almost touched when we sat down again. Almost. Can I tell you something else? He asked. I glanced at him. You're on a roll tonight. A corner of his mouth twitched. When your mom first told me about you, before I met you, I was nervous. About what? I asked. About failing, he said simply. I didn't have kids. Never wanted them. Didn't think I was built for it. Then suddenly there you were, grown, confident, already formed. He stared into the fire again. I didn't know how to enter your life without knocking something over. I swallowed. So you stayed outside? Yes. That hit close to home. I thought you saw me as a mistake, I admitted. Like baggage that came with her. His head snapped toward me. No. The word came out sharp. Immediate. I never saw you as a mistake, he said. I saw myself as the wrong answer. That quiet honesty settled deep in my chest. We sat there until the fire burned low again, until the storm outside softened into snowfall. At some point, exhaustion crept in, heavy and unavoidable. I'm going to try to sleep, I said, standing. Yeah, he replied. Me too. I paused at the hallway, then turned back. Mark, he looked up. Thanks, I said. For tonight. He nodded once. Thank you for not giving up on me. I hadn't realized how close I'd come to doing exactly that. When I laid down on the couch, staring at the ceiling, I expected my mind to race. Instead, it was calm, grounded, like something long out of alignment had finally shifted into place. Upstairs, I could hear him moving around slow, careful steps. Then silence. For the first time since he entered my life, the house didn't feel divided. It felt whole. I didn't know then that this night would become a reference point for everything that came after. That years later, I'd look back on the sound of the fire, the storm, the weight of his hand on my shoulder, and understand that this was the moment his hatred truly died. Not with drama, not with words, but with understanding. Morning came quietly. No alarm. No rush of electricity snapping back to life. Just pale winter light creeping through the windows and the soft, unfamiliar stillness of a house that had made peace with itself overnight. I woke up stiff on the couch, blanket half on the floor, neck sore but calm. Really calm. For a second, I forgot everything that had happened. Then I heard movement in the kitchen. Pots. A drawer. The low hum of someone moving carefully, like they didn't want to wake the house. Mark. I sat up slowly, heart thumping not with fear this time, but with uncertainty. Nights like that had a way of feeling fragile in daylight, like they might vanish if acknowledged too directly. While I walked into the kitchen, he was standing at the stove, wearing an old hoodie and jeans, hair still slightly messy. He looked normal, human, less guarded. He glanced over his shoulder. "Morning, morning," I said. Coffee was already brewing. That alone made me stop. "You didn't have to dash," I started. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." He poured me a mug without asking how I took it. Somehow he got it right. We stood there sipping in silence, the refrigerator humming, snow piled against the back door. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't heavy. It just was. "The roads are still bad," he said eventually. "Your mom texted. She stayed at a co-worker's place." I nodded. "Makes sense." Another pause. Then he cleared his throat. "About last night, Dash." I stiffened slightly, bracing for retreat, for walls snapping back into place. But he surprised me again. "I meant what I said," he continued. "I want to do better. With you." I looked at him. Really looked. "I'm not asking for perfection," I said. "Just consistency." He nodded. "That I can promise." Something in his expression told me that promise mattered to him more than most things he'd ever said. The power came back an hour later. Lights flickered. The heater kicked in. The world resumed like nothing had happened. But everything had. Over the next few weeks, things changed not dramatically, not overnight, but in quiet, meaningful ways. He asked how my classes were going. Actually listened to the answer. He stopped hovering when I had friends over mail or otherwise. Stopped tightening his jaw like he was bracing for impact. Once he even defended me. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but my mom told me later. She'd said, "I worry he feels uncomfortable here sometimes." And Mark had replied, "That house is his too. If anyone's uncomfortable, it shouldn't be him." When she told me, I had to sit down. The hatred I thought had defined our relationship turned out to be something else entirely: fear, misplacement, unspoken history. And once it was named, it lost its power. We never became overly close. We didn't suddenly turn into some perfect blended family, but we became something better. Respectful, honest, real. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and I passed him in the hallway, we'd share a look, just a brief one that said, "We survived that night. We chose differently." And that choice changed everything. Spring came faster than I expected. Snow melted into slush, then disappeared altogether. The days got longer, lighter, and somehow so did the house. Mark and I settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Not forced conversations, not tiptoeing, just small moments that added up. He'd ask if I wanted anything from a store. I'd help him carry tools when he worked on something outside. Sometimes we'd watch a game together without commentary, just existing in the same space without tension filling the gaps. One evening, I came home later than usual. Long day. Group project ran late. Phone nearly dead. When I stepped inside, Mark was in the living room, lights low, TV muted. He looked up immediately. "There you are," he said. "Not where were you? Not why didn't you text? Just relief." "Sorry," I said. "Didn't realize it got so late." He nodded. "I figured. Your mom said you had a presentation. That caught my attention. You remembered?" He shrugged, but I saw the corner of his mouth lift. "I try." That was the moment I realized something important. His hatred hadn't just disappeared. It had transformed into concern, into presence, into something that looked an awful lot like care. A few weeks later, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table. "Mark's been nervous about something," she said gently. "He won't say it outright, but I think he's afraid you still don't trust him. I let that sink in. I do, I said finally. I just don't always know how to show it. She smiled. Neither does he. That night, I found Mark in the garage, sorting tools he didn't really need to sort. Hey, I said, leaning against the doorway. Hey, I hesitated, then said, I'm glad you're here. He froze. Slowly, he turned toward me. I'm glad you are too, he said. No speeches. No dramatiken questions. Just two truths, finally spoken out loud. We stood there for a moment, the smell of oil and dust in the air, the garage door half open to the cooling evening. You know, he added almost gruffly, I don't say it much, but I'm proud of you. My chest tightened. Thanks, I said. That means more than you probably realize. He nodded, eyes dropping briefly, like he needed a second to compose himself. That night, the fire, the storm, the conversation never got repeated. It didn't need to be, because it did what it was supposed to do. It broke something old and made room for something better. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And sometimes that's the strongest kind of love there is. Years later, people would ask me when things really changed between us. They expected some big moment, a fight, a confession, a dramatic apology. But the truth was quieter than that. It was the way Mark started knocking on my door instead of assuming. The way he'd ask my opinion before making decisions about the house. The way he never once flinched when I brought someone home again. Hatred doesn't always end with an explosion. Sometimes it just dissolves. The night of the storm became something unspoken between us. Not a secret, just a shared understanding. A line we crossed together and never needed to cross again. When I moved out a year later, he helped me load the truck. Didn't hover. Didn't correct how I tied things down. Just stood there, hands on his hips, watching like a man trying to memorize a moment. Before I left, he pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. It wasn't natural, but it was sincere. Don't be a stranger, he said. I won't, I replied. And I didn't. Even now, when I visit, the house still feels like home. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. Because one night, in the dark, two people finally stopped being afraid of what they saw in each other. And that changed everything.